Mornings in New York are never tranquil, but today, inside a sunlit, glass-walled mansion in Westchester, everything seemed to shatter in a deadly silence. Yorick Adonis, a man named after an ancient Greek king, stood motionless in the vast living room, his usually composed storm-gray eyes now veiled in an icy haze. He didn't yell. He didn't break anything. He stared at the wedding ring on his finger, then slid it off and placed it gently on the walnut table, as if it had never existed. Outside the window, a red maple branch swayed in the autumn breeze. He was supposed to be in Tokyo this time of year, delivering a keynote about Adonis Technologies' latest bio-AI project. But fate had pulled him home early, just in time to witness the woman he trusted most, naked in the arms of his assistant. You weren't supposed to return now," she stammered, hurriedly grabbing a sheet to cover herself. Yorick said nothing. His gaze held no rage, only the merciless stillness of a man betrayed by the world. Not even explanations or tears could reach him now. He turned away, and for the first time in years, Yorick felt empty. Across the city, in another corner of Manhattan, Selena Grania was packing up the last of her things. A small desk in the planning department of a fashion company she had devoted 3 years to. She's the one who submitted the design that copied the Korean brand. The voice of Marcy, a colleague and jealous rival, sliced through the morning like a knife. Selena didn't get the chance to explain. No one gave her one. She had just broken up with her boyfriend, the same man who once claimed to love her, but lacked the courage to stand up to his mother, who saw Selena's skin color as an insult to their family legacy. And now, the career she had poured her heart into was stolen from her by an expertly laid trap. Selena's hands began to tremble as she boxed up her unfinished sketches. She had tried too long, and been too kind and stayed too silent. And silence never saves anyone from the cruelty of life. That night, they met. A quiet bar on the 17th floor of a high-rise building where the wind howled outside the windows. No blaring music, no flashing lights, just warm golden lighting, strong drinks, and people trying to escape the real world. Selena sat at the bar, wearing a simple white shirt, her hair pulled into a high bun, revealing her elegant neck. She ordered a whiskey, a rare move for her. Tonight, she wanted to be different. Or maybe she tried to forget herself altogether. Yorick sat a few stools away, wearing a charcoal gray shirt with 2 buttons undone, a glass of cognac in hand, an old habit. His eyes stopped on Selena, not for her looks, but for her expression. A gaze that was both fierce and fractured. She turned. Their eyes met. "Their rough day?" she asked, her voice tinged with sarcasm, but not bitterness. Yorick nodded faintly, offering a wry smile, the kind worn by someone who had survived corporate wars, only to lose the battle of his own life. "And you?" "I'm not sure. I just graduated from the school of life's failures." Selena took a sip, her lips curving into a grin, beautiful in its defiance. They laughed. A strange, offbeat laugh in a crowded city. 2 weary souls colliding. No one asked names. No one cared about resumes, titles, or the roles they played during daylight hours. Just 2 people, bare, fragile, and slowly getting drunk on an elusive sense of understanding. Drink after drink, story after story. Honest words no one dared to say in daylight. By the time the bar lights dimmed, they left together. Whose hand took whose, neither could remember. That night, a hotel in Soho welcomed 2 strangers. It didn't ask for names. It didn't promise a tomorrow. Yet and tomorrow would come, with things neither Selena nor Yorick could ever expect. If you've ever felt like Selena, kind but hurt, or like Yorick, strong yet alone, don't forget to leave a like so we can share this story. Drop a comment if you believe fate can begin in meaningless moments. And remember to follow the channel to catch the next part, where destiny begins to speak. There are fleeting encounters in life that seem to leave nothing behind, yet silently sow the seeds of destiny. That night, in a quiet bar tucked away in the heart of Manhattan, two strangers were drunk, not just from alcohol, but from the wounds they didn't speak of. Selena didn't usually go to places like this. She wasn't the type of woman who sought joy in dim lights or loud music. But today, after a day when everything she believed in had collapsed, love, career, even her pride, a dark corner, a bitter drink, and a person who knew nothing about her had become the safest refuge. She chose a spot at the bar's edge, ordered a watered-down whiskey, placed her purse down, and sat upright like a ballet dancer weary after a performance. Each sip of alcohol slid down her throat, not burning, just warm, as if trying to comfort something inside her that was about to shatter. Yorick entered not long after. He didn't have to say a word for the bartender to pour his usual cognac. This bar was where he came whenever he needed silence. A place with no significant signs, no paparazzi, no empty greetings. Just a space quiet enough for him to be an ordinary man, a man freshly betrayed, not a billionaire, not a CEO. His gaze settled on Selena. There was something about her that he couldn't look away from. Not the predictable kind of charm, but a kind of pride cracking at the seams. Her coiled curls pulled into a high bun revealed a slender neck. Her glowing brown skin gleamed under the bar's soft lights, and her gaze pierced through the shell of the everyday. She turned just as his eyes found her. They locked eyes. A second of silence, then she smiled. Not flirtatious, but something genuine. Something deeply human. Rough day? Her voice was husky from the alcohol and emotion, sounding more like a shared burden than a curious question. Yorick smirked. I just lived through a horror film, but I was the main character. Then I must be the supporting role in someone else's tragedy. She lifted her glass, lightly clinking it against his, the soft ring of thin crystal like a gentle punctuation mark between two lost souls. They didn't say much, but every word felt like a shard of glass, reflecting the other's scars. Selena spoke of being falsely accused by a colleague she once protected. She didn't go into detail. Just one look, and Yorick understood what it meant to be stabbed in the back. He told her about the wife he once believed in completely. The only person who knew he couldn't have children. The one who used that truth as an excuse to fall into someone else's arms. Selena didn't ask more. She rested her hand on her glass, her gaze softening. Sometimes, silence is also a way of listening. Between them, there were no names, no past, no questions, only the present, and a clock on the wall ticking slower than usual. The drinks flowed like water. Conversation followed conversation. With each laugh, each glance, a little more of the ice between them melted. Selena tilted her head, resting her chin on her hand, her eyes dreamy. Do you ever feel like life is just a series of small slips, and then suddenly, you don't even know where you are anymore? Yorick didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, but if we're going to fall, we might as well fall beside someone else who's falling too. They left the bar around midnight. No one led, no one resisted. They rose together and walked out of that warm, golden-lit scene. The October night air was cool, the breeze brushing past them like a whisper sent by fate. Streetlights cast a faint glow on their faces. Scarred hands, one by betrayal, won by injustice, now brushed gently against each other. No invitation, no hesitation. They crossed the street and entered the hotel, as if they'd known each other for many lifetimes and were finding the missing piece again in one brief night. The hotel room was strangely quiet. They weren't in a hurry. They didn't demand. Two tired souls leaned into one another, borrowing a little warmth to soothe the bruises on their hearts. Yorick unbuttoned his shirt, his hands pausing as he met Selina's gaze. He didn't say a word, just kissing her forehead, gentle and unexpected, as if asking for permission to escape the loneliness she'd been hiding. Selina didn't pull away. She didn't overthink. Tonight, she didn't want to be strong. She just wanted to be held, just once. Not for her appearance or expectations, but for who she was. Shattered, fragile, and sincere. Then the lights dimmed. Whispers faded into the dark. And the night passed like a wordless dream. Only one person remained in the room when the first sunlight streamed through the curtains. Selena was gone. No goodbye. No name left behind. Just a silk scarf draped over the chair. A faint trace that the night had been real. Yorick was still asleep, his face more peaceful than it had been in years. In his dream, perhaps he had seen something beautiful, something tender, something he would not remember when he woke. And just like that, they parted, like two rivers that seemed never meant to meet again. But fate always has its way. The early autumn sunlight crept gently through the slits in the curtains, landing softly on the high-bridged nose of Yorick Adonis. The hotel room, perched high above the city, was bathed in tender light, like a painting drawn with the breath of dawn. On the pristine white bed, he was still asleep. No pillow clutched, no heavy breathing, just the tall figure curled up like a child who had finally found peace after days of being torn apart by things no one else knew. That moment was strangely serene, but that serenity came after a night he couldn't remember. Selena had woken up early. Her head was heavy, like she had just walked through a nameless storm. She blinked slowly, glancing around the unfamiliar room. Thin silk curtains floated in the breeze, and the scent of oak and peppermint oil spread gently. Everything was beautiful, but unfamiliar. A soft breath sounded from the other side of the bed. She turned, and her heart skipped half a beat. The man lying there was the one she had met at the bar the night before. That face was sharp, but bearing the fatigue of a weathered soul. His forehead was calm in sleep, as if the pain that had suffocated him the night before had receded for a while, making way for fleeting peace. Selena tightened the white sheet around herself, not out of shame, but because of the wave of confusion rising within her. She didn't remember what had happened after they left the bar. The fragments of memory were jumbled like film reels slipping from a projector. Footsteps in a hallway, a touch, a kiss on the neck, then nothing. Everything had vanished into the fog of alcohol and emotion. She didn't know where they had gone, didn't know if it should be called a night or just a vague brush between two wounded souls. But the only thing she was sure of was that she didn't want to face it right then. Selena stood quietly, gathered her clothes, and slipped on her shoes silently. On the table, a European-style vintage clock was ticking towards 7. She looked at it once, as if to mark the moment she left that room, never to return. Just before opening the door, she paused. Something held her back. Not regret, but a strange feeling, subtle, like a thread connecting her to the man lying there. An unnamed connection, beyond reason, yet strong enough to make her turn her head. Selena looked at him one last time, No name, no phone number, no goodbye. She left like the wind, quiet, without a trace. About an hour later, Yorick opened his eyes. The scent lingered on the pillow, a gentle feminine fragrance, different from the expensive perfumes he was used to. This scent was honest, intimate, and made his heart slow for a beat. He sat up and glanced around the room. Empty. No sign that someone had just been there with him. No wallet, letter, or lipstick stains. Only a cream-colored silk scarf draped loosely over a chair. Yorick furrowed his brow. He didn't remember her name. Didn't recall what they'd talked about after leaving the bar. Didn't know if anything had happened between them. Or not. All morning, he sat there, one hand resting on his chin, the other holding a dark cup of coffee. He didn't get drunk easily, but last night had truly been different. A fleeting thought about finding her passed through his mind, but he dismissed it. His life had no room for randomness. Everything had to be within a plan, a schedule, a goal. That was how a CEO ran a tech empire and protected himself after being betrayed by life. Yorick dressed, left the hotel, and returned to his midtown office as if nothing unusual had happened. The week's schedule was packed. A meeting with the investment board, an invitation from the Boston Tech Conference, and the task of finding a new assistant, something he used to leave to HR, but now he wanted to handle personally. Because after the recent betrayal, he no longer trusted anyone easily. Selena returned to her small apartment in Brooklyn when the city was still half asleep. She didn't turn on the lights. The room was bathed in a soft gray light from the window, a kind of light that made one feel adrift, like her emotions at that moment. She took off her shoes and sat on the bed, her hand still clutching her purse, like it was the last piece of clarity she could hold on to. Then she broke down in tears, not out of regret, but because, for the first time in her life, she truly felt lost. Love, career, trust. It all seemed stripped away, leaving a quiet Selena, curled up in her small room, trying to take a deep breath so she wouldn't fall apart. She didn't know who that man was, couldn't be sure if they would ever meet again. But something in his eyes last night left an echo that made her heart, even exhausted, still want to believe. Maybe. It wasn't over yet. She didn't know that somewhere in another building in the heart of the city, that man too was wondering about a nameless woman. And again, fate had quietly laid the first brick in a reunion that seemed impossible. 17 glass floors reflected the early morning sunlight as Adonis Tower rose tall in the heart of Manhattan, like a proud exclamation mark of power and ambition. Elevators glided upward like a never-ending timeline, carrying busy people, tightly packed schedules, and dreams tucked into tailored suits. Yorick Adonis sat on the top floor in an office lined with dark wood. It was minimalist, orderly, and completely silent. He wasn't one for display. No expensive paintings, no statues flaunting dominance. Control was the ultimate weapon for Yorick, and the only thing he trusted. Outside, his secretary had just quit after being exposed for involvement in his wife's affair, a scandal still whispered about in finance circles at cocktail parties, even though Yorick himself had never once spoken of it. He didn't want others to mention it, but he wouldn't let it happen again. This was why, for the first time in years, Yorick decided to personally interview candidates for the executive assistant position. His right hand, the one to accompany him in closed-door meetings, top-secret projects, and multi-million-dollar decisions. He needed someone smart enough to understand, tough enough to endure the brutal pace, and above all, honest enough not to become a blade hidden in a blazer. On the other side of the city, Selena stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her light blue shirt, her curls tied neatly into a bun, her brown eyes glowing with a flicker of new resolve. The outfit wasn't expensive. It was borrowed from her best friend who worked in HR. But her face, despite the lack of sleep, still carried the strength of someone who had hit rock bottom and stood up without anyone's help. She knew her resume wasn't impressive. A recently fired woman, no backing, no connections. But she also knew there wouldn't be another if she didn't take a chance this time. In her hand was a printed resume, neatly formatted, carefully arranged, carrying a quiet hope that someone might see her true worth, not filtered through her skin color, her name, or the scars of her past. And by coincidence, or perhaps cruel irony, the company she chose to place her final chance in bore the name Yorick Adonis. Selena stepped into the Adonis Tower lobby at precisely 8:15 a.m. She was led to a private waiting room, not your typical group interview space. No long rows of chairs, no murmuring applicants. Just her, a glass of water, and a clock ticking slowly on the wall. She didn't know if she was the first or the last, but her palms were drenched, even though the air conditioning was cold enough to chill the bones. Behind the wooden door was a side conference room, where Yorick sat reviewing the next applicant's file. He paused at the name, Selena Grania. The resume wasn't flashy, but the writing, concise, sharp, without embellishment, caught his interest. She had once worked as a planning assistant for a prominent fashion brand, had crisis management experience, and was described as honest, responsible, and quick to adapt. Yet what made him linger wasn't written on paper, but a vague feeling he couldn't quite name. That name had brushed across his memory somewhere, a familiarity he couldn't place. But he quickly dismissed it. Emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford in his world. When Selena entered the room, they both froze for a split second, just briefly. She looked at him, the man behind the meeting table, simple white shirt, light gray tie, cold gaze, and the demeanor of someone born to make decisions. He looked at her, the woman in a blue blouse and black skirt, hair pinned up, a sharp face with a strangely familiar softness. Neither recognized the other. Or maybe something stirred in the subconscious, but reason dismissed it entirely. Because what happens during a drunken night is often the first thing memory chooses to bury. "Sit," Yorick said, his voice low and firm. Selena nodded. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, maintaining composure, like she was born to face men like him. The interview began with standard questions: knowledge base, multitasking ability, experience under pressure, and time management habits. Selena answered clearly, without fluff. She didn't try to please, didn't dodge. Every word bore the stamp of someone seasoned, not theoretical, not hollow. Yorick listened, nodding, but his eyes remained distant. He wasn't the type to reveal emotion easily, and she wasn't expecting him to. However, there was a moment when Selena mentioned having to leave a job due to a misunderstanding that couldn't be clarified, and Yorick looked at her for a second longer than usual. He didn't ask for details, but inside, something small echoed unexpectedly. That familiar feeling, that voice, that gaze, and something faint, like the echo of a breezy night, bitter alcohol, and laughter ringing in a quiet bar. After Selena left the room, Yorick remained seated. He flipped the resume again. That name, Selena Grania, lingered in his mind, but he still didn't recognize her. Just a strange feeling, like fate was playing hide-and-seek in his office. And he, a man who controlled everything, didn't know that the woman who had just walked out that door was the peace he'd once lost on a night he couldn't remember. Fate. Sometimes it doesn't need to declare itself. Just a short interview, a glance that lasts a second longer than usual, is enough to change a life. The first morning at Adonis Technologies unfolded like it had been carved with a scalpel, sharp, precise, and utterly silent. The 49th floor of the building was a separate world, where every movement had a purpose, every word carried weight, and every expression was trimmed down to the bare minimum. Selena stood at her new desk, a simple glass table 3 steps from the CEO's office. She took a deep breath, adjusted the collar of her shirt, and sat down. The computer had already been configured, her company email activated, and the meeting schedule for the day had landed in her inbox at 6:02 a.m., precisely in line with the personality of the man she would now report to. Precise down to the second. Yorick Adonis didn't appear immediately. He always arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, never early, never late, never loud. Every day, he entered the office like a silent breeze. No one heard it, but everyone felt it. As he passed her desk, Selena stood up out of reflex. She felt awkward, but tried to maintain her professionalism. He gave her a slight nod, his eyes revealing nothing but the composed calm that had become legendary in financial circles. Conference room. In 10 minutes, he said, voice low and even, not a single inflection out of place. Yes, I'll prepare the documents, Selena replied. He didn't look at her a second time. The first meeting felt like a test of both speed and mental stamina. Yorick presented a plan to restructure the AI research division at a pace swift enough to breeze through the pages. His voice wasn't loud, but commanded attention so thoroughly that no one dared to interrupt. Selena sat to his right, taking notes rapidly, distilling key points, and updating the digital files in real time. Whenever Yorick turned slightly in her direction, she felt like a laser was scanning her entire body. Not because he was harsh, but because his silence carried weight. Yet within that tension, there were small details Selena noted clearly. The way he never used unnecessary words, the way he listened selectively, intentionally, and how, from time to time, his gaze lingered on her fingers flying across the keyboard as if trying to retrieve a memory he wasn't even sure existed. After the meeting, Yorick said nothing more. He walked into his office, closing the glass door quietly behind him. Selena remained in her seat, eyes on the computer screen, her heart stirred by something faint and unnamed. The following days passed in a rushed rhythm, though not entirely unfamiliar to Selena. She had worked in high-pressure environments, had navigated through unexpected crises, and had been cornered and still found a way to walk out unscathed. But working with Yorick was something else. No praise, no smiles, no room for mistakes. He never asked about her personal life, gave excessive instructions, yet overlooked even minor errors. Still, what left Selena more unsettled wasn't the work itself. It was the moments between the two of them. For example, on Tuesday afternoon, she placed a coffee cup on his desk but forgot to open the lid. Yorick said nothing, glanced at her, then opened it himself, his eyes briefly passing over her wrist, where a small brown scratch was healing. Or the time in the elevator, when she accidentally brushed shoulders with him as the doors closed. Neither said a word, but the space between them seemed to narrow, stretched tight like a violin string, one note away from breaking. Selena couldn't explain why he sometimes looked at her for so long, as if trying to name something without form. But immediately after, he'd turn away again, cold and composed, as if he too dared not cross some invisible line. While most employees were getting ready to leave early for the HR director's birthday party on Friday afternoon, Selena stayed behind, finalizing the market summary report for the upcoming week's meeting. Yorick stepped out of his office, briefcase in hand, and saw her still working. "You're not going?" His voice was calm but direct. Selena looked up, slightly caught off guard. "I want to finish the report before I leave. I'm not used to leaving things half done." Yorick nodded, standing still for a moment. Then he said slowly, as if weighing his own words, "You're doing good work. Keep it up." Selena froze slightly. The compliment wasn't loud, but a sentence like that was equivalent to a gold stamp in Yorick's world. She watched him walk away, black coat draped over his shoulders, tall back proud and distant. And in that moment, she suddenly realized, this man gave her a strange feeling, both close and impossibly far, as if he had once touched her life in some way that memory couldn't grasp. Selena didn't know that the memory they were both vaguely chasing wasn't in their minds. It was quietly growing inside her body. On her 10th day at the new job, Selena woke up on a damp Monday morning, not from the sound of her alarm clock, but from a sudden, intense wave of nausea that surged through her like a cold tide rising from her stomach. She rushed to the bathroom, bare feet hitting the icy tile. Dry heaves echoed in the still air, leaving a metallic sting in her throat. No tears fell, but her entire body felt contorted in a strange kind of helplessness. It wasn't the flu, and it wasn't work stress. It was something more profound, quieter, and terrifying. After rinsing her mouth, she stood motionless before the mirror for a long time. The reflection showed no changes. Her eyes were still deep, her lips slightly dry from the autumn wind. But something was different inside, as if her body had begun to speak before her mind could catch up. She bought a pregnancy test from a small pharmacy 3 blocks from Adonis Tower during her lunch break. Cap pulled low, sunglasses on. She walked straight in without looking back, as if she were doing something shameful. She locked herself in the restroom of a tiny cafe. 3 test sticks were lined up next to each other on the porcelain sink. Selena stared at the clock, each second stretching out endlessly. When the second line appeared, clear and undeniable, she stood frozen, unable to exhale. 3 sticks, 3 lines, 1 truth. She was pregnant. In that moment, the world seemed to slow down, not because she didn't know what was happening, but because she knew too well what it meant. How could she not, after living with her single mother sister for 3 years, changing diapers, mixing formula, staying up all night to soothe a screaming infant with no one to take turns? All too well, she knew motherhood wasn't a rosy dream. It was a solitary journey, with no reverse gear and no warranty. And the cruelest part was that she had no idea who the father was. She could only guess tentatively and cautiously that it must have happened that night. The night she couldn't even remember whether she'd given away something sacred with full awareness, or reached for one final ounce of comfort amid the wreckage. And that man, who was he? A blur, a faint memory, lost between the scent of oak wood, white linen, and the sound of liquor hitting glass. Selena didn't return to the office that afternoon. She emailed to say she needed the rest of the day off for health reasons, then went home and buried herself beneath the blankets, like a child who'd lost their parent in a crowded store. Evening settled in, but the darkness inside her arrived far earlier. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about her body, no longer hers alone. A small life was forming inside, growing hour by hour like a miracle, or a storm yet to be named. She didn't think about getting rid of it. The thought never crossed her mind. Not because she was ready to be a mother, but because she knew that some children are born from imperfect moments, yet still deserve a place in the world, whole and unashamed. She just wasn't ready to face doing it all alone. The next day, Selena returned to the office, looking calmer on the outside than anything she felt within. Everything was the same. The presentation charts, the whole inbox, the brief instructions from Yorick through her Bluetooth headset. He didn't notice any change, or maybe he was just too guarded to show it. But a brief wave of dizziness swept over her when she presented the project timeline at his desk. Her vision darkened for a second, and her hand gripped the edge of the desk as if to anchor herself to reality. Yorick looked at her. This time, his eyes weren't cold, not overtly concerned, but carrying a quiet kind of attentiveness. "You all right?" he asked, softer than usual. Selena nodded. "Just a little tired." He didn't press further, but later she found a new bottle of water and a small protein bar on her desk. No note, no mention, but not something the office had arranged. Selena smiled faintly, even though her heart was in utter chaos. She began thinking more about the baby, wondering if it would be a boy or a girl. Would it have her brown skin, or some unfamiliar eye color she'd never seen before? What would its smile look like? Would it feel love in a world where its father had no name? She even considered whether she should try to find the man from that night. But how? No name, number, or clue except a face blurred by memory. Maybe he had forgotten her, or maybe he never remembered. But she would never forget again, because within her, she carried a part of him. And that was something no one, not even fate, could take away. Late October in New York carried a melancholy beauty, like an afternoon jazz tune, quiet, wistful, and steeped in fading gold. On Lexington Avenue, maple leaves drifted like unspoken questions. At the top floor of Adonis Tower, a man slowly realized he was being drawn into something beyond his control. Yorick Adonis had never been the kind of man who believed in chance. Everything had to follow a system, a principle, and clear logic in his world. Even emotions, if they existed at all, had to be confined within boundaries, never allowed to overpower or interfere with reason. But Selena Grania was gradually becoming a silent variable he couldn't explain. He didn't look at her often, but every time she walked into the room, her presence seemed to shift the temperature in the air. Whether it was a report, an email, or simply delivering his coffee on time, every move she made was tidy, deliberate, and error-free. She never crossed personal boundaries, never asked questions outside her duties. Yet that very discretion made him feel uneasy. She was too quiet, too proper, too much like himself, and something about her felt too familiar. Selena didn't understand why she felt so tense every time she stepped into his office. Was it his deep, composed, yet piercing gaze, or the silence that exposed others? Or was it the way, when he wasn't looking, she found herself watching him more than she should? While organizing meeting documents on his desk one morning, a light breeze slipped through a partially opened window, sending a stack of papers fluttering. She hurried to pick them up, and at that exact moment, Yorick walked in. She stood up, arms full of documents, almost colliding with his chest. They were so close, she could see the curve of his collarbone beneath the white shirt, could feel his breath warm against her hair. Their eyes met, just for a second, but long enough for neither of them to hide anything. Yorick was the first to look away. He said next time, "Don't open the window unless the papers are secured," his voice so calm that one might think he didn't care, unless they listened closely. Selena nodded softly, but the heart in her chest didn't return to its normal rhythm so easily. That evening, the company hosted a small anniversary celebration for the R&D department. Selena hadn't planned to go. She was tired, nauseous, and disliked crowded places. But just before the end of the workday, the HR assistant passed by her desk and said, "The boss said you should attend. Don't decline." She wasn't sure if it was an order or a sign of concern, but in the end, she went, wearing a forest green silk dress that fell just above her knees. Nothing flashy or bold, but enough to set her apart from the rigid office uniform. Yorick arrived late, as usual. He entered the room in a sleek black suit, with no tie and 2 buttons undone on his shirt. The entire room seemed to still for a few seconds when he entered. He didn't have to say a word. The energy shifted. His gaze passed over Selena, then stopped. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Selena pressed her lips together, tilting her head slightly to avoid his eyes, but she knew it was too late. Yorick left the group of shareholders he'd been chatting with and walked toward her. Not quickly, not slowly, but each step collapsing the space between them. "You've changed your style," he said, not teasingly, but with an oddly sincere tone. Selena gave a faint smile. "I didn't want to stand out. And yet, you ended up being different," he replied, his eyes quiet as a lake reflecting a night sky. Selena looked directly at him. "Some people are different without even trying. Isn't that true?" He didn't respond, but she saw the corner of his mouth curl ever so slightly, just for a moment, then vanish as if it had never happened. That night, after the party, she stood on the 17th floor balcony, silently watching the city lights. The breeze stirred her dress, making her shiver. Yorick appeared again, without warning, standing beside her. Not too close, but close enough to make the distance between them feel fragile. "Do you always stand alone after parties?" he asked, eyes still fixed on the distant skyline. "Only when I don't know where I belong." He was silent for a long while, then turned to her. "You say strange things, and you're the strange man who makes me say them," Selena replied, her voice as soft as the wind brushing her hair. They stood in silence, but not in distance. In that moment, something cracked open, not loudly, not dramatically. Just 2 souls, who had sworn not to let anyone in again, standing beside each other in a quiet space, unguarded. Yorick turned away first, leaving her with a half-sentence. "Tomorrow, come in early. I want to revisit the strategy for next quarter." Selena gave a subtle nod, but something had already shifted in her heart, something no longer tied to work. She knew this relationship shouldn't begin. She was pregnant. He was her boss. Neither of them remembered that fateful night between them. And even if they did, where would it lead? There were no promises here, no easy future. Only one thing was growing inside her, and one feeling was quietly blooming between them. Silent, unnamed, but undeniably real. A dangerous relationship, but perhaps the only one that mattered. November drifted by like a quiet river, cold and unrelenting. The wind sliced through the avenues, rattling the high-rise windows. But inside the 49th floor of Adonis Tower, the air remained as solemn and composed as ever. Every step was measured in seconds. Every glance carried intention. And every word resulted from sharp calculation. Selena sat at her desk as usual, her fingers typing steadily across the keyboard, but the pulse beneath the skin of her wrist had started losing its rhythm. Her body was beginning to speak, not loudly, not violently, but in a gentle, insistent way that made her afraid. Sometimes it was just a dull ache low in her abdomen. Sometimes it was a fog of exhaustion so dense she could sit still for 10 minutes and forget to blink. And then, on a Wednesday morning, she made her first mistake. The quarterly financial report had been revised at Yorick's request. Still, while updating the data, she had accidentally entered the wrong ROI, return on investment, for the Lumen project. A small number, but it was a sign of distraction to Yorick. He didn't get angry. He paused when he reached that line, and his steel-gray eyes lifted, holding her gaze for 2 breaths. His expression wasn't cold, but Selena felt like she had just exposed a weakness she had spent weeks trying to conceal. "I thought you were the type who didn't let emotions affect your work," Yorick said, his voice calm and even, not harsh, but not soft either. Selena felt her nose sting. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll correct it right away." He said nothing more. She stood, backed out of the room, spine straight, until the glass door closed behind her. As she was revising the report that afternoon, Selena received a strange email. No sender name, just a cold subject line. "How long do you think you can hide it?" Attached was a blurry photo, taken on a phone, an image of her leaving the OB/GYN clinic on 64th Street, where she had gone for a second checkup to ensure the baby was developing properly. Her stomach was flat then, but her face betrayed the exhaustion she could no longer mask. The message below read, "That baby will cost you everything. Careful there. Perfect assistant." Selena froze. She had no enemies, not enough closeness with anyone to provoke jealousy. But in a place like Adonis Tech, where all eyes gravitated toward the 49th floor, perhaps the fact that she, a woman of color with no elite background, had become Yorick's assistant, was enough for someone to find her presence intolerable. She printed the photo, tucked it into a notebook, and hid it in her drawer. But inside, panic spread like ink blooming in a cup of water. The next day, during a closed-door strategy meeting with Yorick and his leadership team, Selena was again present as the coordinator. While taking notes, she felt a gaze slicing through the glass wall. Beatrice, a woman from the legal department. Her stare was like a fine blade, not openly hostile, but filled with scrutiny. Selena sat up straighter, fingers tightening around her pen. But when the meeting ended, and she prepared to return to her desk as usual, Yorick stopped her. "Selena," he said, calling her by name for the first time. She halted, her chest tightening. "Yes? You haven't seemed well lately." The seemingly simple sentence landed like a quiet twist to her core. Not because he asked, but because he noticed. "Just a mild cold," she replied with a forced smile, avoiding his eyes. He looked at her a moment longer, his gaze seeming to measure something larger than her words. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" This time, Selena looked up. Their eyes met. She knew, if she opened her mouth, the truth would spill out like an unfinished symphony that could no longer be paused. But she wasn't ready. Not ready to lose this job, this position, and more than anything, not ready to thrust her unborn child into a storm of pity and suspicion. She shook her head, gently, as though if she spoke louder, everything would collapse. "Nothing, sir." Yorick nodded, but his eyes didn't leave her, as if something remained unresolved.
Chapter Muscle.
When Selena returned to her desk, her phone buzzed with another anonymous message. "If you won't say it, I will. Good luck." This time, she didn't flinch. She sat down, opened her computer, and continued working, as if the world had not just shifted. But deep down, she knew It was time to prepare, because secrets always find a way to surface. And when they do, no amount of composure, not even coldness or professionalism, can serve as a strong enough shield. That morning in New York smelled of damp mist mixed with the crisp edge of late autumn. Golden sunlight spilled across the glass panels of Adonis Tower like a silent reminder. The things hidden in daylight will eventually come to light, no matter how hard we try to turn away. Selena stepped into the elevator, fingers brushing her pale gray coat sleeve. She hadn't slept deeply in days. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself in a whitewashed room where the child she hadn't yet seen appeared, blurry, faceless, but gently tapping its tiny palm against her belly, like a call from within. She kept a calm exterior, but her steps had lost their natural rhythm. Her body was beginning to react, bit by bit each day. Nausea struck earlier, sometimes mid-meeting, forcing her to sit still, jaw clenched, to keep the truth from spilling. And she knew. The window of silence was closing, day by day. On the 49th floor, Yorick sat at his desk, eyes resting on his computer screen, but his thoughts drifted far behind the haze of memory. Since the recent company party, Selina's presence had begun to unsettle him in ways he didn't want to admit. It wasn't because she was beautiful. It was because her existence stirred in him a feeling, unsettlingly familiar, a sensation that had passed through his memory before, like the trace of perfume on a silk scarf, or eyes glistening in the heat of a drunken night. Something he once dismissed as a hazy, meaningless dream. Until this morning. Beatrice, the in-house counsel with eyes as sharp as razors, walked into his office, carrying a slim file. "Should you be aware of this?" she asked, placing a stack of photos and a surveillance report on his desk. Yorick didn't respond, merely glanced at it. Inside were photos of Selena exiting a medical clinic and a prenatal appointment log under her full name, with a diagnosis: 12 weeks pregnant. 12 weeks. Yorick froze for several seconds. Those two words clenched around his mind like a vice. The world around him blurred, and for a moment, he could hear his heart pounding like a distant bell echoing inside his chest. 12 weeks. The exact amount of time since he met the mysterious woman in a quiet bar near Soho. The woman whose eyes resembled Selena's. Too much to ignore. A bold, irrational, yet strangely inevitable thought began forming in his mind. He looked at Beatrice. "Don't tell anyone else about this," he said, voice cold and absolute. She shrugged, retreating with a faint flicker of satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. Once the door closed, Yorick leaned back in his chair, eyes shut, as a storm surged inside him, part doubt, part dread. He didn't believe in coincidence. And now, he was starting to think that night wasn't just a drunken blur. He opened a drawer, pulled out something he had kept, without understanding why. A deep burgundy silk scarf, soft and faintly scented like skin and whispered memory. His fingers tightened around it. The answer, he realized, might lie where he had never thought to look. A DNA test. That afternoon, Selena was summoned to Yorick's office. No warning, no assistant. A brief message. "Come up." She entered, holding the project brief she had intended to get signed. But when she saw his eyes, not angry, not cold, but filled with an eerie silence, she knew something was waiting for her. He gestured for her to sit. He didn't speak right away. He placed an envelope in front of her. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, a DNA report, matching samples from the 3 embryos developing in her womb to the DNA of Yorick Adonis. "What is this?" Selena asked, her voice trembling slightly. You tell me, Yorick replied, his eyes like blades, not cutting skin, but slicing straight into the marrow. Selena went still. Her eyes scanned the bolded result. The probability of a biological relation between DNA sample A, Yorick Adonis, and fetal samples is 99.9987%. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Selena sat frozen, hand instinctively placed over her belly, as if shielding something fragile. Yorick didn't look away. You know I'm sterile, he said hoarsely. At least, I've believed that for 20 years. Selena looked up. Her eyes weren't frightened, just tired, deeply, achingly tired, as if she'd been bracing for this day and had no idea how to face it when it finally came. I didn't know it was you, she said. I don't remember. I didn't realize. How could you not know? Yorick interrupted, not sharply, but with a low, controlled voice. Selena swallowed hard. A tear slipped silently from the corner of her eye. Because it was just one night. One night. No name, no face, no number. Yorick sat motionless, fingers clasped, arms resting on the desk. No voices were raised. But what shattered between them wasn't because the truth was too heavy. It was because it had always been too close. Selena stood, bowed her head slightly, an apology too complex for words. You don't have to claim the child. I don't need pity from anyone in this building. I want to live with dignity in the choice I made. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, his voice called out, rough and slow. It's 3. Selena froze mid-step. Yorick looked at her, eyes no longer cold, no longer logical. Just a man unraveling beneath unnamed emotions. You're carrying 3 of my children. And in that moment, for the first time in years, neither could hold back what needed to break open. All that remained was silence. The kind of silence where fate stopped being a joke and became a truth, alive and growing inside both of them. Winter arrived earlier than usual in New York. There was no snow yet, but the wind had sharpened, as if the city was bracing for something about to break. On a quiet December morning, Selena sat in the OB/GYN clinic, eyes fixed on the ultrasound screen, her hands clutching the edge of her coat. The heartbeats echoed from the 3D ultrasound machine. Not one, but 3 distinct, steady rhythms, so vivid they stole her breath away. Triplets, the doctor emphasized again, as if afraid she hadn't understood. You're at 13 weeks, and all the growth indicators are stable. But I must be upfront. Carrying multiples is not an easy journey. Selena pressed her lips together, throat tightening. She had suspected it, but hearing the word aloud made the reality hit harder, heavier. In that moment, she no longer felt alone, because inside her body, 3 lives were growing, hour by hour, minute by minute, with their hearts, breaths, and a bond she could never untangle. She thanked the doctor and left the clinic slowly. Outside, the sky was ash gray, not raining, but heavy, like a damp blanket stretched across the city. She crossed the street, hand instinctively shielding her belly, a mother's gesture, unaware, learning to carry a new sacred weight.
Chapter 8.
At that exact moment, on the top floor of Adonis Tower, Yorick Adonis stood before the massive glass windows, eyes scanning a cloud-covered skyline. Behind him, the envelope containing the DNA test results still lay on his desk, like a paper blade, small yet heavy enough to split a life in 2. He had spent the entire night confronting the word infertile, which he had accepted as fate. Since he was 14, Doctors had told him fatherhood was biologically impossible. For years, he never questioned it, never fought it. He had built his entire life on the foundation of that impossibility. And now, everything was shifting. He remembered that fateful night. Fragmented memories began to realign. The quiet bar. The girl with eyes that seemed to disappear from the world. The first touch. And the morning after. A silk scarf left behind on the hotel sofa. The memory he thought was drowned in alcohol turned out to be the door to an unimaginable truth. 3 children. Not 1. But 3. Yorick didn't know how to process it. He'd handled deals worth hundreds of millions, overseen thousands of employees, negotiated with governments, and stood toe-to-toe with the savviest investors on Wall Street. Yet now, faced with a woman whose belly was slowly swelling with life, he felt like a man who had just lost his compass in the desert. He wasn't angry at her, or at himself. He was stunned to realize there are things in life that, no matter how tightly we control, can shift our path in the gentlest and most seismic way. That evening, Selena opened the door to the small apartment she shared with her best friend from college. Her friend, Camille, was already waiting in the living room, eyes sharp and braced. "We need to talk," Camille said immediately, setting down a hot tea. "A man just came looking for you." Selena froze. "Who?" "Yorick Adonis." The name sliced through the room like a blast of cold air. Camille stared at her. "You don't have to hide it anymore. I know you've been keeping this pregnancy secret for weeks. But things are different now, aren't they?" Selena sat down, arms wrapping around her belly, her voice barely audible. "He knows. He knows everything. And what are you going to do?" "Camille, I don't know," she exhaled. "I didn't plan for this. I didn't plan for 3 children. I didn't plan for a man like him to be their father. So what are you afraid of? That he'll walk away? Or that he'll want to keep everything?" Selena stayed silent, because what she feared most wasn't rejection. It was that even she didn't know what she truly hoped for. Selena received an invitation, or a summons, from the chairman's office 3 days later. But this time, it wasn't to discuss a project or revise a timeline. It was to face something that now bound them together with a cord that couldn't be undone. When she walked in, Yorick was already there. There was no conference table, no paperwork. 2 people, 2 chairs, and 1 medical folder lay gently between them. He didn't ease into it. "Selena, you're carrying my 3 children." It was the first time he called her by name. The first time, no titles stood between them. Selena gave a slight nod, eyes unwavering. "What do you want?" she asked, quiet but firm. Yorick didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, standing before her. Taller, but no longer radiating the commanding force he usually did. In his gaze now was something entirely human, uncertain, tender, and startlingly honest. "I don't know what I want," he said slowly. "I know. For the first time in my life, I can't stand on the outside anymore." He lowered his head, voice rough with vulnerability. "I used to believe I would never be a father. I used to think love wasn't meant for someone like me. But you've brought these 3 lives into being, without asking anything from me. No demands, no resentment. That makes it impossible for me to turn away." Selena listened to every word, like each one was a thread stitching together the tear inside her. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled slightly. Then he raised his hand, didn't touch it, and hovered it near her belly. "Let me begin. From somewhere," he said, like a vow. Selena looked at him, and in her eyes was something both old and entirely new. Then she nodded, not as surrender, but as a beginning. Quiet, gentle, and full of uncertainty. Like love itself, when it's born not from a plan, but from something simple. Life. On an early winter afternoon, the New York sky was covered in a pale, foggy white, like a glass pane fogged by countless breaths, with no one bothering to wipe it clean. The last leaves on those roadside trees fell in silence, like quiet goodbyes, and inside Adonis Tower, a man was looking back on his life with a completely different pair of eyes. Yorick Adonis sat alone in his office. No secretary, no keyboard clacking, no stacked reports. On the desk, aside from a cup of cold coffee, lay the medical file that had followed him for over 20 years. Pages yellowed with time, bearing his name in clinical print. Diagnosis: congenital absence of the vas deferens, complete infertility. He had once accepted that as a definitive sentence, had grown used to a future with no children's laughter, no birthday balloons, no tiny arms wrapped around his neck calling him dad. That was why he hadn't reacted when his ex-wife carried the weight of disappointment when she suggested using a sperm donor. He hadn't blamed her for leaving, nor tried to hold on to a marriage built more on gratitude than love. And now, 3 lives were growing inside a woman he remembered only through a scent and a gaze shared in one intoxicated night. Every truth he had once believed had collapsed, in the gentlest yet most brutal way. Yorick set the old file aside. In front of him was the most recent test result. No doubt, no error. The medical system that had branded him infertile had been wrong. Or perhaps the word impossible was nothing more than a name for limitation. He could still be a father, and he already was one. A father to 3 children, soon to be born, with a woman who made his heart beat differently each time he looked into her eyes for reasons he couldn't explain. Selena received a call from Yorick late that afternoon. No assistant, no scheduled meeting. "I want to see you, alone." She arrived at his penthouse in the Upper East Side, a space only his closest circle had ever entered. The apartment wasn't what she had imagined. There was no ostentatious luxury of a billionaire. Everything was minimal, warm, like a man who had grown used to solitude, yet still tried to preserve a trace of life. Yorick was standing on the balcony, his smoke-gray sweater hugging his tall frame, eyes cast out over the city, as if wondering how someone could live in a place this crowded and still be so lonely they didn't recognize destiny knocking. "Are you doing okay?" he asked, not turning around. Selena stepped inside, letting the door close gently behind her. "Better than last week. But I'm not sure I'm ready for this." He turned, his face visible under the soft yellow lights, no longer cold, only composed, with eyes still and deep like a winter lake. "He said you don't have to be ready for everything, because you've already done the most extraordinary thing." Selena looked at him, surprise flickering in her gaze. He stepped closer, not too fast, but close enough for her to see the weariness in his eyes. Not from work, but from years of living as if he didn't deserve to be truly loved. "I got retested," he said, with a gentle voice like recounting a dream. "The results, they're real. The doctor said the original diagnosis might have been an error. Or maybe medicine isn't perfect." Selena stayed silent. In his eyes was a strange light, not quite joy or confusion, but acceptance, after a long journey of doubting himself. "And what do you think?" she asked softly. He sat on the sofa across from her, hands laced, eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know," he admitted. "I used to think I shouldn't have children, not because of a condition, but because I was afraid. I wouldn't know how to be a father. Scared I'd repeat the things I went through. Emptiness, distance, praise without hugs. Selena quietly moved closer, sat beside him, but didn't touch. Maybe children don't need a perfect father, she said. Just someone who wants to step into their lives. Yorick looked at her. That gaze made her feel small, but never weak. I want to learn, he said, step by step. Not just to be a father, but to be by your side, as a man who may not love ideally, but won't walk away. She smiled softly. That smile wasn't an answer, but it was an opening. The air between them was no longer tense, thick with unspoken secrets. It was a space of waiting, patient, tender, between two people trying to find each other through the maze of fate. Yorick reached out and, for the first time, touched her belly. The gesture was unhurried, not possessive, just a greeting from a man who had just discovered he still had a chance to love, and be loved back, through the forms of 3 children growing more each day. They will need you, he whispered, and, if you allow it, they'll have me too. No words were said in the quiet, like a song resting on its final chord, but both of them understood. The truth had just been born, not from a test result or a blurry memory, but in that very moment, that he wasn't just capable of being a father. He could become the man she and the 3 children never thought they'd find. That morning, a light rain fell. Not a thunderous downpour, but a fine mist, like fog scattered from the sky, landing on the glass roof of the Adonis Tower penthouse, ringing out in soft rhythms like the weary sighs of a tired city. Inside the quiet high-rise apartment, Selena sat by the window, gently brushing her fingers along the warm surface of a teacup, her gaze vaguely following the trail of water sliding down the glass. Everything had happened too fast. From that blurry, fateful night to the day she learned she was pregnant. From hiding every breath inside the office to the moment she faced Yorick, with all the confusion and fragility that hadn't yet found a name. And now, he said he wanted to be a father, wanted to be by her side, wanted to begin. But begin from where? To Selena, every promise, even the softest, carried the shadow of responsibility. And what she feared most wasn't silence. It was a promise swallowed halfway through. Yorick came to pick her up just before noon. No driver, no crammed schedule, just a man in a pale stone-colored shirt, holding an umbrella, standing in front of the apartment she shared with Camille, as if the walls between them had quietly thinned without either of them realizing. "I want to take you somewhere," he said when she stepped out, his gaze softening as it rested on her belly, where life was growing more each day. Selena didn't ask. She nodded. They arrived at an old house in a northern suburb of the city, not far, but distant enough to feel removed from the daily rush. A 2-story brick home with a backyard carpeted in fallen leaves, an aging wooden porch, and a silent maple tree standing watch by the steps. "This was my mother's house," Yorick said as they entered. "I grew up here. After she passed, I kept it, but never came back." Selena looked around. Everything smelled of time. Old books, black and white photographs, a few quiet reading lamps. On the wall hung a wooden-framed painting of 3 children holding hands in a meadow. She stopped in front of it, her heart tightening. "I used to think I'd never have a family," Yorick said behind her, "because I was afraid. Afraid to love someone and then lose them. Scared to have children and not be good enough to keep them. Fearful of becoming like my father, the man who chose work over staying." Selena turned around, her eyes no longer surprised, just quiet, understanding, and somewhere in there, sorrow. I chose solitude, he continued. Choose control, choose coldness. And then, you showed up most strangely. No invitation, no plan. You made everything I feared feel alive again. She looked at him for a long moment. So, I'm part of that fear? Yorick stepped closer, never breaking eye contact. No, you're the reason I don't want to run anymore. Silence. A silence suspended midair, between sky and ground, where hearts sway between yearning and self-defense. Selena pressed a hand to her chest, where 3 tiny heartbeats lived and breathed with her. Do you know how many times I asked myself whether I should tell you? She said, her voice like mist, but each word weighed like stone. There were nights I lay awake, listening to my heartbeat, wondering, if you knew, would you stay for me, or just out of responsibility? Yorick didn't respond right away. He reached for her hand, which had carried her through the first lonely months of pregnancy. I don't have a perfect answer, he said softly. I only know. I never felt truly alive until I discovered 3 children existed because of a moment I once thought meant nothing. Selena withdrew her hand, not coldly, just gently. You want to stay, but you're not ready, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. You're still learning to believe you're worthy. I understand that, but I can't let my children grow up in a relationship built on doubt. The words slid in like a blade, not sharp enough to break what they were slowly forming, but just enough to make them pause and look closer. Yorick went still. He had never been rejected before, and had someone say no to him, especially in a gentle setting, with hearts wide open. Selena bowed and said softly, I don't need someone who stays out of obligation. I need someone who chooses to stay, even when I don't ask for it. A breeze slipped through the window, creaking the old wooden chair. Outside, it was still drizzling. Yorick didn't stop her. He only nodded quietly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement and understanding. Understanding that forgiveness doesn't always come from doing the right thing, but from daring to admit you were wrong and being willing to learn how to love the way someone else needs. Selena stepped out of the old house. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She felt light, a quiet relief of someone who had said everything that needed saying. And inside her, a small ember of belief glowed faintly. That man, he would come back, not for the 3 children, not out of duty, but because among all the things he feared, she was the one he would learn how to hold on to. December slid through the city like a thin veil of smoke, cold, busy, and all too easy for people to lose themselves in the twinkle of Christmas lights strung across shop windows. Amid the rush of people preparing for the holiday season, Yorick Adonis was nowhere near the spotlight. Instead, he found himself in an unexpected corner few would imagine. The neonatal ward at Elmsworth Private Hospital, where he had stopped by after a meeting with the hospital's executive board about funding new medical technology. Far removed from the powerful image the media often painted, Yorick at that moment was simply a man standing before a clear glass pane, watching newborns swaddled in white blankets, sleeping soundly as if untouched by hurt or complication. One of the babies stirred gently, shifting in its dream, tiny hands curling as if trying to grasp something in the air. Yorick's eyes stayed on that baby. In his mind, the memory of Selena recounting the ultrasound, 3 tiny heartbeats thumping in unison echoed. No images, no words, sound reverberating in a white room. And in that exact moment, a silence within him began to fill, not with logic, but with feeling.
Chapter
Yorick didn't reach out to Selena immediately after she turned him down. He didn't come looking for her with power or invoke responsibility to draw her back. Instead, he did something he'd never considered before. He began learning to come closer, not with footsteps, but with patience. He started by educating himself. Every night after leaving the office at 8, instead of driving straight back to his penthouse, he stopped by the medical bookstore on 34th Street, where there was a small section for expectant parents. He didn't buy the loud-titled books. He chose the simplest one, The First Months of Life, What a Baby Feels. He read each page silently, attentively. No highlighting, no notes, just allowing his mind to soften for the first time so he could understand. A child needed to be felt, not managed. Later, he quietly scheduled a meeting with Selena's private doctor, not to interfere, only to ask for pregnancy updates, under one condition. She didn't need to know. "You have no legal right," the doctor said after a long pause. "No," Yorick replied, "but I have the right intentions, the intention of someone trying to learn how to become a father." Selena knew nothing of this. She spent most of her time at home, having stepped away from her position at Adonis Tech under a quiet agreement proposed by HR. No resignation, no scandal, just a calm departure, much like how she'd arrived. Camille was by her side, but even her closest friend couldn't fully grasp the inner tug-of-war Selena faced whenever she thought of Yorick. Sometimes she missed him, vaguely, like one remembers light after growing used to the dark. Sometimes she feared that letting him in again would mean risking the kind of hurt she might not survive a second time. Until one weekend afternoon, Camille walked into the room holding a paper bag. "Someone sent this," Camille said, setting the bag on the table. No name. Selena opened it. Inside were 3 hand-sewn stuffed animals, a fox, a panda, and a tiny giraffe. Each had a small scarf around its neck, with a name delicately embroidered on the corner. Hope, brave, and solace. Hope, courage, comfort. She stared at the gift for a long time, said nothing, but something soft unfolded in her chest. Tender, calming, and warmer than any blanket on the nights she'd tossed and turned in quiet anxiety. A few days later, a handwritten letter arrived. No envelope, no signature. "I don't know how to hold a baby. I don't know how to soothe midnight cries. I don't know how to read prenatal charts. But I'm learning. A little, every day. And if you still want to do this alone, I'll step back. But if there ever comes a moment when you need someone to lean on, just signal, and I'll be here. Not out of obligation. But since I found out about those 3 little lives, I haven't known how to return to how I was before." Selena read every word over and over again, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. Not out of fear, not out of exhaustion, but because she knew that man, he was truly moving toward her, not with promises, but through a shift in his soul. The next afternoon, Selena sent a message. Just 3 simple words. "I'm ready now. No more, no less." Yorick didn't text back, but an hour later, he showed up at her door. No umbrella, no coat, as if nothing stood between them anymore, but a man showing up with his most honest self. She opened the door. He said nothing. Only, for the first time, he knelt slightly and gently placed his hand over her belly, where 3 tiny hearts beat in rhythm, like footsteps racing toward the sun. And Selena, The woman who had taught herself how to be strong on her own finally allowed herself to lean on someone, not to be dependent, but to move forward together. The journey to fatherhood doesn't begin when you first hold your child. It begins when a man dares to change for something greater than himself, for 3 lives yet to be born, and for the woman who brought an entire world into his life with a glance. That Christmas Eve, the snow came late. The first flakes landed quietly on rooftops, falling into the streets where pale yellow lights flickered, illuminating each passing step. The city took on an extraordinary stillness, no longer buzzing with its usual rhythm, but breathing in sync with the people, warm, gentle, like a long whisper of winter meant only for those in love. Selena sat in the living room of the new apartment she and Camille had rented in the Brooklyn suburbs, near a park, filled with trees and soft morning sunlight. Her belly was now visibly round, nearing the 6th month. The 3 children growing inside her in their ways, changing with each day, every little kick a silent message that she was no longer alone. Yorick had been present for most of the recent prenatal appointments. He always arrived on time, usually a few minutes early, bringing juice or crackers for her like a quiet ritual. He didn't push, didn't claim roles. He stood by her side, lightly touching her hand when the sound of the baby's heartbeats came through the ultrasound. In those moments, his eyes always reflected a wonder he couldn't hide. As if he knew he was becoming a father, he still couldn't quite believe such a miracle was truly happening. Selena slowly opened up more, but not in haste. She allowed things to unfold as they needed to, without pressure, without a planned conclusion. Between them was a quiet respect, a parallel rhythm gradually intertwining, where she no longer had to be strong alone, and he learned to be gentle through his most sincere awkwardness. On the afternoon of December 24th, as the city dimmed its office lights to make room for the sparkle of balcony decorations, Selena received a message from Yorick. "Can I borrow a night that doesn't matter too much, not for the holiday, just because there's something I want to tell you?" She smiled softly and replied with a single word, "Sure." He arrived at 7 p.m., carrying no flowers, no wine, only a small wooden box and those deep-set eyes he always wore when stepping closer to her. "I want to take you somewhere," he said. She nodded, wrapped herself in a long cardigan, and let him steady her down the stairs. They didn't go far. Just a few blocks away, to a small house tucked in the corner of a quiet residential neighborhood, a 2-story home he'd recently purchased but had never invited her to. Selena looked through the window. Inside, warm yellow light spilled across a tidy space. Nothing extravagant, no flashy displays, just a Christmas tree adorned with ivory ribbons, a few small stockings hanging quietly above the fireplace, and 3 tiny pairs of shoes lined up neatly beneath the tree. Selena stepped inside in silence. Her eyes took in every detail, things not arranged for show, but for understanding. Yorick said nothing. He walked to the small dining table and took out 3 handcrafted silver trinkets from the wooden box, each no bigger than a keychain. One bore the name Hope, the second Brave, and the third Solace, the same names she had once seen on the stuffed animals sent anonymously. "I carved them," he said softly, "because it's how I remember. Each of them, even before they have real names." Selena didn't smile, but her eyes softened, like a door opening to the wind. "I used to think proposals had to be grand," Yorick continued, opening a small drawer in the box and taking out a ring that was not too shiny or oversized. Just a slender platinum band with an engraving on the inside. "For the life we didn't plan, but still chose." He knelt on one knee. No roses, no witnesses. just the warm light casting a glow on her hair, and 3 little hearts resting peacefully inside their mother. "Selena Grania," he said, his voice low and steady, as if whispering into her heart. "I can't promise to be a perfect father, nor the best husband, but I can promise you this: I won't leave. I'll stand beside you. When you're tired, when you're angry, when you feel like giving up, and even when you say nothing at all, I'll be the one who holds on to you, and our 3 children, if you'll let me." Selena looked at him for a long time. No tears fell. She placed her hand on her belly, an instinctive gesture, then glanced at the 3 small silver pieces bearing the names she once thought were symbols. But now, they were real. She stepped forward, said nothing, and held out her left hand, her ring finger bare. Yorick slid the ring on gently. There were no fireworks, no cheers, only a silence complete with gratitude, between 2 people who had once lost their way, and now found each other not through destiny, but through the choice to stay. Amid all life's uncertainties, sometimes it only takes one quiet moment to know that love doesn't need grand promises, only presence at the right time. And sometimes, the simplest proposal is the most profound vow of all. By the end of April, New York began to warm up, as if someone had gently peeled back the winter quilt from the air. A few pale blossoms remained on the branches of the last cherry trees, drifting down softly like the final whispers of the departing season. Sunlight stretched across the small garden behind the red brick house, where something sacred but straightforward was about to take place, a beginning written by choice, not by chance. Selena stood before the mirror in a soft white silk wedding dress with no elaborate lace or long veil. Her belly was high, holding 3 little lives peacefully nestled within, stepping with her into a new chapter. Her curls were tied in a neat low bun, revealing the elegant line of her neck and the small earrings Camille had chosen herself. No red lipstick, no bold eyeshadow, just soft peach lips and eyes glistening with a kind of inner light no jewelry could imitate. Camille walked in, holding a bouquet of freshly cut peonies from that morning. "You ready?" Selena smiled. "Not exactly, but I'll walk out." "Then that's enough." Camille squeezed her best friend's hand. "You don't have to be ready. Just trust." Out in the garden, there were a few guests. Only about 30 people, some of Selena's closest friends, longtime advisors, and colleagues of Yorick's. A few familiar faces from the hospital and the local daycare. No cameras, no MC, no grand rituals. White wooden chairs in 2 small rows on the lawn, soft pink ribbons swaying in the spring breeze. Yorick stood in the aisle strewn with flower petals, wearing a charcoal gray suit with no tie and a shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His hands held nothing, only clenched slightly, as if holding on to a promise breathing inside him. When Selena walked out, her arm looped gently through Camille's. Everyone fell silent. Not by rule, but because something deeply real was unfolding. A woman walking into her wedding, not with the air of a dreamy princess, but as a mother-to-be, as someone who had once chosen to live alone, now choosing to love and be loved with unwavering trust. 3 white cradles were placed side by side in the front row, empty, but everyone knew they belonged to the most honored guests of all, waiting for the world to meet them for the first time. The officiant read a short declaration, not overly formal, just an excerpt from an old letter. Love doesn't need to be perfect, just real, and brave enough to be chosen again, every day. When asked to say his vows, Yorick turned to Selena, who trembled lightly in the breeze, took her hand, and spoke in a voice not loud, but clear and steady. "I once lived believing in nothing but logic, believing no one came without eventually leaving. But you walked in like a question without an answer. and I stopped needing one. I just wanted to stay. Selena smiled through tears. She replied, placing her hand over his heart. I've lived through days when no one called my name, and long nights where I only heard my breath. But you were the first to stay when I was silent, the one who didn't force me to be strong or push me into softness. You just were there. And because of that, I believe. When they exchanged rings, no one cried, but every eye was wet. It was a moment with no fireworks, no string quartet, but everyone knew real love doesn't need too much sound. Just two people looking in the same direction, stepping forward together, even when the path ahead is unclear. A few weeks later, Selena gave birth to 3 babies, 2 girls and 1 boy. Healthy, round, with honey-brown skin and deep eyes that seemed to know each other from a faraway place. Yorick named them with Selena one afternoon, as sunlight fell over the worn hospital bedsheets. The eldest girl, Leora, meaning my light. The second girl, Sienna, named after the city Selena always dreamed of visiting. And the boy, Eland, meaning solace in an ancient language. Yorick held each child in his arms, not clumsily, as he once feared. His hands trembled, but from emotion, not awkwardness. He spoke to each baby as if he'd known them forever, as if he had heard these 3 heartbeats echoing in a dream he had once forgotten. Selena watched from the hospital bed, exhausted, but content. Something in the way Yorick stood that day made her believe everything he'd once said was true. He didn't need to be the perfect father. He just needed to be a sincere one. In the end, it wasn't fate that brought them back together. It was the quiet choices, the patience in not being ready, the courage to face fear, and the love that came late, but right on time. A billionaire who once believed he was infertile, a woman once abandoned by the world, a drunken night that once seemed meaningless. 3 children, now an undeniable truth. And a home, not born of plans, but of a heart whole enough to love and be loved.
Yeah.
If you've come to the end of Yorick and Selena's story, then perhaps you believe, like I do, love is never perfect, but it always finds a way, through misunderstanding, silence, pain, and hope, to arrive exactly where it's meant to. Drop A if you believe in unscripted beginnings. Leave a comment if you've ever loved someone for no reason, only because you couldn't not love them. And don't forget to follow the channel for more touching love stories, where the heart is heard just as it is. Because in a world full of noise, sometimes a whispered, "I love you," is the one thing we never forget.